Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's going on? It's the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am the host every Friday, Ethan or Faye. You know what it is. You know what time it is. We're about to get into some NFL stuff, some fantasy rankings, some topics of discussion in the football atmosphere. Nothing really has transpired in the last week as far as updates for coronavirus or anything like that, so we really don't have to stick too much into that. As we know, if you know what's been going on, keeping up with the news, nothing really much has changed as far as the NFL's front. Just remember, keep practicing social distancing, and we'll see where we are, because that just seems to be what we have no choice but to do, is just to wait and see where we are at a later part of time. But we have some things to talk about other than that. We're going to talk about some Delvin Singletary, talk about him for a little bit. You know, Bills Mafia. We are a Bills supporter in this podcast. We like the Bills here, even though they're not my favorite team, but I like to support them. I think they have good upside as an AFC sleeper team once again. So it would be very imperative to pay attention to Bills fantasy this season. So we're going to talk about some Bills. We're going to talk about who goes off the board first at each position, most fantasy potential in the NFC South. We're going to talk about NFC South uniforms, as the two of the NFC South teams have changed their uniforms, new upgrades, new duds. And we're going to talk about the biggest what-ifs in football right now. All right, but first, we're going to get into some Detroit topics. So Detroit fans, if you're out there, here we go. So the Detroit Lions are fielding trade calls for their number 3 pick. So holders of the number 3 pick, that is the Detroit Lions, could have its picks of the remaining litter following the selections made by Cincinnati and Washington. But the Lions' coveted targets may well be gone by the time they're on the clock. So there's a lot of potential scenarios of why teams spend countless hours preparing for every possibility, and the Lions' preparation has included conversations about potentially moving out of the 3 spot overall in the trade, and in a trade with a team looking to jump up. According to Ian Rappaport, who reported teams are looking to move into the number 3 spot, have been receptive in early discussions with the Lions. The Lions could very well stay at 3 and celebrate if Ohio State defensive end Chase Young is still on the board, but it's very unlikely, in my opinion, and that the Lions must prepare for a situation in which their top choice is gone and they don't need to consider anyone else worthy of the number 3 pick. At that point, Detroit could instead move back to take advantage of a quarterback-needy franchise to pick up additional assets, which could be key tools in continuing to remake their roster. So the Lions had a rough year last year, and there's a lot of different factors. You know, Matthew Stafford was hurt, and also their very, very interesting running back, Kerryon Johnson, was also hurt. So, and they just had a lot of problems with running the ball in the first place, and it just snowballed from there on. They traded Darius Slay recently to the Eagles. It's been a real interesting point to see where they were going, because at first it looked like there was rumors for Stafford being gone, and we kind of felt like Darius Slay was going to be out the door. So it's not really a full rebuild, but it's definitely a retooling year. So they're going to try and do their best to put themselves in the best position to try and make something shake with the roster they have currently. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. They still have Marvin Jones. They still have Kenny Galladay. They still have some pieces there, Wolf, and they still have their running back that recently came off injury. So hopefully we can see some carry-on action this season. I know a lot of carry-on owners, I was one of them, were very disappointed to see him go down last season. We didn't really get to see exactly what the potential was, even though when carry-on did play those first few games, he wasn't breakout. He wasn't doing too well fantasy-wise, but he was doing enough. He was getting points. He was being active, and he was showcasing why he was really, really good last year as a value guy, because people weren't really looking for Kerryon Johnson as much as maybe they should have. But alas, we don't know what could have happened last year with Kerryon Johnson. So that is the Lions thing. They potentially might move out if I was them, because I do not believe that the Redskins, I feel like the Redskins are going to play it safe. That seems like the most Redskins move to do is play it safe, and they're probably going to take Chase Young there at number 2. But, there's always a chance that they could take Tua Tagovailoa and really shake some things up. But I doubt that they would. Their off-season moves of today would be to, one, announce that they're going to have a quarterback competition between Haskins and also their quarterback that they got via trade for the 4th rounder from the Panthers in Kyle Allen. So who knows? Who knows really what's going to happen with that? I don't think they're going to draft another quarterback, but we'll just have to see it to believe it. And I think that's why these conversations are being had now, because you never really know what people can do. There might be some real buffoonery happening in this draft with so much being different. Everybody's war rooms are going to be live chats. Nobody's going to be really talking. What if somebody mutes their mic by accident and says, hey, maybe we should not take Tua. We should go with Chase Young and keep it pushing. But they don't hear him because his mic's muted. And all of a sudden, boom, they take Tua because of a miscommunication. I wonder how many of those stories are going to come out. There was a miscommunication, and all of a sudden, guys are leaking out to reporters. Ian Rappaport is getting a firestorm of anonymous sources saying that the Wi-Fi was bad. We made a bad pick. That's what I feel like might be happening soon. If there's a bad reception on a pick, guys are just gonna start blaming internet. The owner didn't know how to handle the monitor. There was some connection issues. The call kept dropping. Somebody didn't know how to mute themselves. They couldn't bring up their live stream. It was getting hot. But yeah, that's all for the Lions. We're going to talk about some Joe Burrow, Chase Young stuff as well. So, as you know, we talked about it last week, that the draft is going to be moving fully to online, or should I say video call conferencing style, no in-person contact whatsoever. And they're going to try and implement the draftees, the people on the board involved in the live broadcast. So it's only 2 weeks away, and we have more time to learn about it. But there are 58 prospects that are set to be involved in the virtual production, and now we know 5 of them. So Joe Burrow of LSU, Oklahoma quarterback Jalen Hurts, my boy, Ohio State defensive end Chase Young, Jerry Jeudy from Alabama, and Wisconsin running back Jonathan Taylor. The full list will be revealed on Thursday's Path to the Draft, and that will take place, I think that's the Thursday coming. So whenever you hear this podcast, you'll probably have the full draft list out and available to you. And, of course, the NFL Draft is, in fact, April 23rd through the 25th. So they're really going to try and make this as entertaining as possible. and we'll just see how this production goes. Maybe it's really good. I'm really curious to see. I just hope that people don't start blaming their drafting mistakes on things that probably were not the cause of the drafting mistakes. So if you've been involved in fantasy, you know all the tricks of the trade, right? Oh, my connection dropped. Oh, somebody was calling me. I had to go do something. My kids needed me. So then you got auto drafted somebody you didn't want. I highly doubt there'd be auto draft situations here, but it would just be really, really funny if somebody ended up drafting a guy they didn't want due to the complications of doing this essentially digitally over the airwaves. This is a good experiment to see just how far technology can push the NFL as far as anonymity. So automated NFL. Self-sufficiency. Do we need the TV? I guess so, because they're televising it. But I wonder if they're going to stream this online too. Like, this would be really fun if they stream this on like Twitch or on any other streaming device, YouTube, or streaming service, should I say. That'd be cool to see. See them partner up with somebody and stream the draft. Be interesting to see where their market lies in that situation. But that's really all the top tier interesting news coming out. There's not too much coming out of that. Of course, there's Kansas City is keeping cornerback Rashad Breeland to a 1-year deal, reported by Ian Rappaport. Other than that, there's not a lot of big time news coming out. But we're gonna take a break and then we're gonna get into some Bills conversation.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, so coming back, we're going to talk about Devin Singletary, running back for the Buffalo Bills. Now, he is a guy who did not see the field as much, especially early on in the season, as he did in the latter halves, and people really started to pick up on just how talented he was, especially in the playoff game, where they really saw him do some things and near the tail end of the season. Really looked like he was starting to come into his own and able to make a instant impact on that offense that really needed some explosiveness out of the backfield, because although we all love Frank Gore and what he means to the league and just his longevity and being able to still play at a relatively high level, NFL level running back and be as productive as he always has been, which is a testament to him and just how well in shape he is and just how much he prepares every week for the game. But if you owned him in fantasy, as in Devin Singletary, you were extremely frustrated because he just was not getting the touches. And you could see some crazy numbers coming out where when he would touch the ball, it would just be automatic. He would just get so many good looks. So as a rookie, the Florida Atlantic product, Devin Singletary, displayed speed to the edge and ability to pound for tough yardage when given the chance. He galloped for 775 yards on 151 carries with 2 scores. He averaged 5.1 yards per carry. So that was the highest among all running backs with at least 140 totals and tied with NFL rushing leader Derrick Henry. Bills general manager Brandon Beane told Pro Football Talk on Wednesday that he believes that Singletary can be the workhorse in 2020 or a committee member. So he could do either or. That's what they're saying. He's an unselfish player. If you want him to be the workload guy, I think he could definitely do it. I think year 2 is going to be better for him. So this is the thing. The talent is there, right? The talent is there for this guy. I believe in him. I think he is one of those backs that you can put into the category of a versatile back that you need to be. He's a 2020 back for sure. He can catch really well out of the backfield. He can make people miss. He's very shifty, elusive, has plenty of takeoff speed, and has good vision for a rookie, or had good vision for a rookie coming in. Knew where to find the hole, knew where to find the seams. So he reminds me a lot of Alvin Kamara. He reminds me a lot of guys like Kareem Hunt, in as far as his tough nose, run the football down the middle type of attitude. He seems to be willing to be coachable and do things that he's not supposed to do, things that he's supposed to do on the field. And I just think that they're probably looking at the situation and saying that Devin Singletary is probably their back for the future, and they probably don't want him as a Bills team. They probably don't want him to explode monetarily. So what I mean by that is they don't want him to be so good that they have to look at how much they're going to pay him in the future. But the running back market, as we've seen, has literally tanked year after year after year. So there's probably no telling what the market will look like when it's time for him to come get a check. So I don't think they're probably worried about it too much, but it's always something in the back of somebody's mind. It's like, well, if we strike oil on this running back, how many years do we have to use him before, 1, they have to pay him, 2, they have to let him walk, or 3, we're just going to have to keep franchise tagging him because we don't have the funds to pay him. So right now, this is the time to be playing your defense, only because Josh Allen is still on a rookie deal, still on a cheaper contract. So is all their offensive weapons there, except for, of course, Stephon Diggs, who they got via trade. So most of their offensive weapons are on cheaper deals or team-friendly deals, while it's time to start stacking up the defense a little bit more, beefing up the players surrounding Josh Allen, surrounding these young players, so that way you have the best chance of extending your championship window or your playoff performance window, because I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm 100% confident in calling this team a championship level team, but they definitely can be better than what they ended off with last season, as I believe they had some reasons for why that playoff game was lost, and they could clean some stuff up in order to push forward into the playoffs, even with the team they had constructed last season. So the Bills currently have TJ Yeldon, Tawan Jones as backup options to Singletary, and Singletary has a firm grip on every down duty. So the Bills, who do not have a first-round pick, seem likely to add a running back to the group during the NFL draft, but we don't know how early that will come, and we'll tell the truth about how Beanie really feels about Singletary's abilities when they decide to take a running back there. So we don't know if he takes a running back in the 3rd round, then we may have some conversation there about just how much we should be looking in stock for Devin Singletary. So you just have to keep your eyes open, your ears open, your eyes peeled, your ears open, and your mind fueled enough to make sure you're paying attention out there. You don't want to be just brain dead going into the draft, because the draft is important for everybody, not just GMs, not just coaches, not just scouts, not just analysts, but also for the fantasy guys. We need to pay attention to see what teams are doing with their picks, so that way we know who to look for as far as sleepers and guys that we may need to rethink about their roles on certain teams, because we never know when the load management is going to start trickling down in the NFL. And I don't mean as in a negative way of load management. It is a legitimate strategy of running back by a committee that has been getting people championships all across the league year in and year out. There has not been a significant running back win in the NFL as far as Super Bowls, I suppose, since maybe Marshawn. I don't think there's been a one running back scenario since Marshawn where we know who the big time back is, who's the guy who's workhorsing it around, and that was it. There was no other guy in the backfield that really shared the sugar and took all the glory. So since Marshawn, everything's been running back committee. There has not been that guy. Of course, we know the Patriots have really been running back committee for quite some time. That has not changed. Of course, the Kansas City Chiefs were a running back by committee system. Even when they had Kareem Hunt, who definitely was a fantasy stud, they still ran in a running back by committee system for the most part, and they definitely did so with Williams and their other running backs surrounding, as they had LaShawn McCoy, even though he did not play much near the tail end. And then, of course, the Green Bay Packers, they did ran by committee a little bit. They did have Aaron Jones, who had an excellent year, but they also had Mr. Williams, who was also having some success. But I meant to say the 49ers were one of those teams that were very much so running back by committee, and they found a lot of success as they made it to the Super Bowl, being a run-heavy offense and relying on the run game to get them into their play-action sets and being able to do all the stuff that Kyle Shanahan wanted that team to be able to do. So, running back by committee is seeing its way to becoming a more standard league tactic and strategy rather than one that may have been a little lackluster. Even maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't as apparent that was the way to go. But we've seen it done really early and have success, and we're seeing it have success even more so now than ever. So be prepared, because guys are not going to be running the ball, toting it 100% all the time like Derrick Henry. That is more of a traditional way of looking at running backs. And the league is moving far away from the traditional sense more and more each day, each moment that we live on this planet. All right, so we're going to take another break here, and we're going to get into who goes off the board first by position.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
The 2019 fantasy season left us with a lot of interesting things to think about as 2020 approaches us even further for fantasy football, if we even have it. But we're going to think positive here and think that we have it together. We're going to have a fantasy season that's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. Even if we only get 12 games in the regular season, we will have football, hopefully, in our lives. And we have to continue to think about it that way. Positive thoughts, positive thoughts, positive thoughts. Woo! All right. So with that being said, we want to look at the best, I guess, positional players, or each player at their position. Who is the best and who is the highest ranked fantasy-wise in order to take somebody there when the time is right. So who is the first guy off the board at their position? And I'm looking right here, top 75 wide receivers. These lists always vary, but usually the top 5 stay the same. And here we go. Number 1 is Michael Thomas, which makes quite a bit of sense. Had another career year, and he seemingly is going to keep getting better and better. What was great from last year to see from Michael Thomas was his production did not drop when Drew Brees was out for 6 weeks of football, and he played with Teddy Bridgewater, who, although I have a lot of love for Teddy as a Saints fan, he did us well. He got us over the hump and into the playoffs, kept us afloat. I'm not going to sit here and say that Teddy Bridgewater was my pick for quarterback of the future for the New Orleans Saints, nor do I think that he is the barn burner. He's the next big thing at quarterback. He is a starter quality quarterback because we see who else is starter quality, at least according to the rest of the league. And it would be insulting to say that I don't believe Teddy Bridgewater is a quality starter. I think he is. I just don't think he is the next thing since sliced bread. But Michael Thomas saw little to no production drop off when it was coming to getting a pass from another quarterback than from his Hall of Fame teammate in Drew Brees. So Michael Thomas seems to be the reasonable choice to have at number 1 for wide receiver. Number 2 is Davante Adams over DeAndre Hopkins and Julio Jones and Tyreek Hill coming in at 5. So that might be interesting, seeing that DeAndre Hopkins is 3. But here's why I don't think that's that bad. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be with Larry Fitzgerald. He's going to be with a lot of other interesting wide receivers. I believe Andre Roberts is on that team, unless he has left recently. My memory might be mixing things up, but I believe Andre Roberts is on that team. I know for a fact they just paid Kenyon Drake, and he just had a really, really good season, and we don't know what they're going to do in the draft. Not to say that DeAndre Hopkins shouldn't be the assumed number 1 option in the passing game, but DeAndre Hopkins is going to have a lot more competition taking the ball away, or have a lot more guys around him that will be getting the ball more than he probably would ever imagine, because Houston did not have as many weapons as you would think they had. They did not have that good of a run game. They did not have a really, really quality tight end. And they did not have receivers that could stay on the field long enough to be really, really good number 2, number 3 guys to pair up with DeAndre Hopkins. So DeAndre was really doing a lot of stuff kind of solo dolo out there. And that can really, really be taxing or that can really, really inflate some numbers. And I'm not saying he's going to have a humongous drop off, but I am saying that it does matter to some degree. And Davante Adams is in a similar situation that DeAndre was in. He does not have a lot of wide receiver help across the board. They lost Jimmy Graham, so even though Jimmy Graham has not been what he once was, he was still somewhat of a pass catching threat out there. And Aaron Jones is a quality running back in this league, but he is not the best pass catcher. And honestly, when Aaron Rodgers is in the game, he is driving the ball down the field, and he's really not looking for the check down play as much as you would imagine, especially underneath the new offensive scheme since leaving with Mike McCarthy from a few years ago. Tyreek Hill at 5 makes sense. They share the sugar a lot in Kansas City, even though Tyreek Hill has really, really big play potential. But that makes sense. Julio Jones at 4. Julio gets a lot of looks. He just does not get in the end zone quite as much as you would like him to be in fantasy. And that's where I'm sticking to that. Julio, I love you, and I hate you because you're on my rival's team. But fantasy, I understand. You are the truth. All right. Running backs. Number 1, Christian McCaffrey. Makes sense. Best fantasy player outside of the quarterback position last year, and it's not even close. He was almost an MVP candidate for a solid 3-week stretch. And he literally carried that Panther offense literally on his back by himself. So that's all I have to say on Christian McCaffrey. He is a lock for top 3, and he's probably not 2 or 3. 2 is Saquon, which is interesting to me because it really depends on what the Giants do in the draft and seeing how they really, really build around this offense, because they definitely need some offensive line help. They definitely need Daniel Jones to be more productive in his second year and to develop. And then we'll see where exactly Saquon is. Saquon did get hurt, but he came back strong in the second half. But this first half was a bit rocky, and we would like to see him return to his first year production level. Ezekiel Elliott is 3. Ezekiel Elliott also had a rough start because he did not really go into training camps, and he had to work his way into shape after signing that deal, and then he kind of came back into form. And the Cowboys offense is still going strong with what they usually have. They do have to remember that he is getting a little bit older, so maybe they should look into running back by committee strategies and seeing what they can get in the draft. If they draft a running back, let's say in the first 5 rounds, you need to be a little bit concerned about Ezekiel Elliott's touches, and that's just on me. 4 is Dalvin Cook, and I think I would put Dalvin Cook above Ezekiel Elliott at this point. That might be a hot take, but I think that is one that you need to look at. I think Nick Chubb is also somebody who needs to be ahead of Alvin Kamara, who sits at 5. Nick Chubb is 6. I would take Alvin Kamara and put him at 6 just because of the fact that Nick Chubb is that Cleveland offense. If Nick Chubb isn't going, that offense isn't working, and that's just how it is. Alvin Kamara was a little floaty last year. He had some injuries, and he could kind of be phased in and out of the offense depending on how the scheme is going for the Saints on that in particular week. So you never really know. All right, let's go into tight ends really quickly. Tight ends, Travis Kelce is number 1, George Kittle number 2, Zach Ertz 3, Mark Andrews 4, Darren Waller 5. So interestingly enough, I've had 3 out of the 5 right there on my fantasy team at one point. And there's different fantasy teams, of course not the same one, but I had Travis Kelce. He was excellent for me. I'm not sure if he's number 1, but I would assume since they have a little bit more big play potential and Travis Kelce has a lot of help around him, Travis Kelce doesn't get double teamed every 5 seconds like George Kittle does, and that just is how amazing George Kittle is to be number 2, and he gets a lot of attention, a lot of flack. Zach Ertz had a weird year, so did the Eagles in general, so we don't really know, but 3 sounds interesting. I like to see Mark Andrews at 3 in the rankings. I'd put Mark Andrews above him. And Darren Waller at 5 seems right because Austin Hooper is coming to a new team with a lot more weapons, so it makes sense that he would drop a little bit in the rankings. Jared Cook at 9 seems a bit weird. I would like to see him a little bit higher on that list, but that is just me. And I think Evan Ingram, who is 11, is going to be one of the bigger fantasy sleepers around. Quarterbacks, this is going to be quickly done here. But Lamar is 1, Patrick Mahomes 2, Kyler Murray is 3, Russell Wilson is 4, Dak is 5. And just to round things out, Deshaun is 6, Josh Allen is 7, Carson Wentz is 8, Tom Brady is 9, 10 is Drew Brees. I think that the first 2 are no-brainer, no questionables. Kyler Murray on potential probably is 3. If you want to be safe, Russell Wilson should be 4. Dak 5. You can probably toss in Dak and Deshaun and flip-flop them because they both have hot streaks and cold streaks. So it really is depending on how the season is going for them. But those are the list. So, yeah, Christian McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson, Travis Kelce, Michael Thomas. Those are your 4 guys and 4 positions who should be your number 1. And everything else is kind of dependent on how the rest of the offseason plays out. But we're going to take another break, and we're going to get into the NFC South.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
The NFC South has retooled, re-upped, has really made itself one of the top 3 conferences in the NFL, and it's probably not number 3 as far as power rankings, as far as how tough this is going to be and how much of a bloodbath it is actually going to be in the division. So here we go. Who has the best fantasy potential, and which one should you be looking at getting ahead of time? So, number 1, we have to think about, as far as fantasy rankings, who have the higher rankings. So, NFC South is really wide receiver heavy as far as talent there. And we have to make sure that we know what we're doing when we do it. So, they have 1, 2, 3, 4 in the top 10 as far as wide receivers and rankings for wide receivers. So that's Michael Thomas, number 1. Julio has been fringe 3 or 4, depending on how you feel about Julio Jones. Then there's Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Those are usually in the somewhere between 6 to 10 in fantasy. That is already really good. So the NFC South is probably going to get a huge bump in viewership as far as fantasy owners are concerned. There's going to be a lot of guys watching those teams and seeing what's going to happen. And then not to forget to mention, there's guys like Jared Cook at the tight end spot who are a top 10 tight end guy. And then we have players in the wide receiver position who are quality wide receiver number 2 looks. So, for example, Falcons, they have their, is it his 3rd year or is it 4th year? I believe it is his 3rd year coming up that the Falcons will be using their number 2 wide receiver drafted out of Alabama again in Calvin Ridley. So Calvin Ridley is a quality number 2 guy. And then, of course, the Saints just went ahead and picked up a really good pickup, in my opinion, for their wide receiver group in Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders is a guy that's going to help Michael Thomas, is going to help Alvin Kamara, it's going to help Drew Brees be able to space out and get people the ball and more efficiently and take the top off, as they'll have a guy who has not only good speed but good hands and ability to really stretch the defense out. And Michael Thomas may not be double teamed as much. They won't be able to sit back and drop in the zones as much. And we'll see if Drew Brees can really get the ball down the field in a quality fashion. So running backs, let's go ahead and get into that. Well, actually, first let's go into Carolina, because I believe that Carolina has some fringe wide receiver 2 potential here. Robbie Anderson is on that team. They have Curtis Samuels, DJ Moore, who I'm a fan of. So between Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore, I like those 2. We'll have to see who is the designated number 1 guy there. But I think DJ Moore was their number 1 option last season, and he did some really nice things that I witnessed. And Curtis Samuel was their number 2 guy. Fantasy-wise, DJ Moore was more of a number 2 guy. Curtis Samuel was more of, if you're in a deeper league, he's like a number 2. Robbie Anderson was the number 2 guy in fantasy, but number 1 option on the Jets. So we'll just have to really go ahead and see. if Teddy Bridgewater can get them the ball as much as you'd like them to. All right. Running backs, Christian McCaffrey, number one running back in the NFC South by far, no question. Then we have Alvin Kamara, the number 2. And then we have Todd Gurley, who almost forgot that they have Todd Gurley in Atlanta now. So Todd Gurley is there. And then the Buccaneers have Ronald Jones, who honestly had a pretty decent season. And I would expect to see similar production from Ronald Jones. But there's a lot of number one running back guys here. And I have to put an asterisk by Todd Gurley just because we don't know what Todd we're going to be getting, as his arthritis in his knees have not been helpful as far as the fantasy community, especially considering what he used to be not even 2 years ago. It's really crazy how far the drop-off has gone for him. All right, so now we go into tight ends. The best tight end, in my opinion, for fantasy is the safe play is Jared Cook. And then it's kind of pick your poison everywhere else. So Carolina, right now, their tight ends are Self-Devolve, Tamarik Hemingway, Chris Manhertz, and Ian Thomas. Saints have Jared Cook, Jared Griffin, Josh Hill, Jason Van Lane, Cole Wick, and Mitchell Lowen. Tight ends for the Buccaneers, Anthony Alucar, Cameron Brate, O.J. Howard. And those guys, O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate, they seem to always kind of butt heads as far as who is going to be their guy, as in who was in Tampa, as far as who is going to get majority of the touches. And that just always how it has been. Atlanta lost their number one tight end, but they received one in Jaden Hurst, so he might be a guy that you may look in if Matt Ryan really, really enjoys getting the ball to the tight end position. That's one that you need to go ahead and look into checking out. So the NFC South, who takes it now, right? I guess that's the bottom line of what we have to look at. Who takes the NFC South now that it's so talently filled? We have Tom Brady there and the Bucs now, so the Bucs have a legit quarterback. Not to say I was a fan of Jameis, even if it was just for the laughs and the memes, but I think Jameis gets a bad rap right now just because nobody wants him, but he kind of went into the quarterback free agency period in a really bad situation. Once Tom Brady decided to go to the Buccaneers, it was like, well, who really wants Jameis now? There's not a lot of options for Jameis at this particular time. And it's really unfortunate because I believe with the right offensive coordinator, maybe they can be able to work out a system where Jameis can still sling the football, but also not tone down the mistakes and being able to do some things, because I don't think 30 plus touchdowns is a mistake. I think that's raw ability, his ability to play the position. He always had the talent. I think that's the problem. Jameis is a talented quarterback in theory, but in practice he's very mistake prone, and that's why you saw the 30 for 30 out there. So a lot of teams are thinking that it's better to go with a guy who may not be as talented, but is definitely less likely to throw 3 interceptions a game. And if you look at a defense in Tampa who did not have the best statistics, but if you look at all the picks that Jameis put them in, they're really, really actually not bad of a defensive unit as it may appear to be. And you kind of have to reframe your thinking when it comes to Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensively, because Jameis doesn't throw maybe 30% of those interceptions. One, they're probably in the playoffs. 2, their defensive rankings are probably a lot better overall, and we never know what they could have actually been. And the tandem of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans may actually see a little bit of an uptick as far as production, because Tom Brady is a lot more careful with the football, and he will be hungry and he will want to prove that he can do it in a different system with a different team and different players and with actual wide receivers to throw the football. That's one thing. So Tom Brady hasn't had quality wide receivers for a little minute now, and he has been trying to do what he could with New England for some years. So he finally got some pieces around him that are hungry to get the football, that can go out and get it, and we just have to wait and see when the season starts. I'm really interested to see some training camp footage, if we ever get to training camp, about this whole situation. That alongside the fact that the Falcons and the Saints can easily be the top dogs of the division, as they always find a way to have a high-powered offense, and we'll just have to see what they do because everybody beats up on each other. So Panthers may be the one man out, but also I don't want to say that there's not a possibility for them to be good too, because they have a solid quarterback, they have a really good running back, and their wide receiver core is not as bad as it used to be, and their defense may be retooling, but they may be able to figure some things out. So this division is really good, and I'm interested to see what happens with it, and we have a lot of good fantasy guys involved, so try to pick one up. All right. So we're going to take another break here, and we're going to get into some more NFC South talk, but really about uniforms, so it'll be a little more fun.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
The Atlanta Falcons and Tampa Bay Buccaneers both received some overhauls to the uniforms, and there's a lot of opinions going on the Twitters about them. Some people are saying, man, that's fire. Some people are saying, man, that's okay. Some people are saying they're complete garbage. Others are a little bit more tame with their takes. So here are mine. I'm going to be looking at them, not for the first time, but really with a detailed look, and looking at them as just how enjoyable they are to look at. So I'm going to look at the Falcons first, and I'm going to try and make this as not biased as possible. So, and by bias, I mean just completely call them not good, because I'm not a fan of them. But here we go. Atlanta Falcons. So first thing first, I have to say that some of their color schemes are pretty nice. I like their white. Their white on whites are really nice. I'm not going to lie. I think they're really good. And I think that the red, black, and white color scheme, colorway is nice, because it kind of brings together that uniformity that you see with people who cheer for the UGA Bulldogs. So it reminds me a lot of UGA, and it's one of the UGA is probably bigger as a fandom in Atlanta sports culture than the Atlanta Falcons are, which is weird to say, but that is in fact the case. There's just way more UGA fans per capita than there are Falcons fans in the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia, because Georgia and the city of Atlanta in general is really a transplant city where a lot of people come from different places. And it's easier to root for a college team than it is an NFL team that is not typically your own. So I think that the color choice was really nice here. I do think that the big ATL in the top center of the jersey is really hard to get behind, and I would have just much rather see them spell out Atlanta in smaller fonts that the Buccaneers did, or the Falcons in some sort of way, but the ATL is just a little bit off-putting to me, and so are the numbers. So the numbers are huge. Like, they take up the whole torso of the body. They take the whole torso from pectorals to basically your belly button. That's where the numbers are. So maybe it's just the fact that this number 20 is a little bit weird, but I think it's really, really strange. And I'm not a fan of the lack of sans serif, or I'm not lack of sans serif. I'm not a fan of the sans serif number choice here, because there's one which is more of a classic jersey where the Dirty Birds where they were the Dirty Birds, where they have serifs in the number 2, and because they're using 20 as an example for these photos. And I like the fact that the 2 has a serif on the tail end. There's a tail on the 2 instead of it just being. It looks kind of more. The more modern looks look more like a digital alarm clock rather than a jersey number to me, and it just looks like a bad font choice in my opinion for the numbers and the letters in general. But as far as that, the colors seem cool. There's a gradient one where it goes from black to red, and the player's hands or the model's hands block out how the gradient looks. So it could be a gradient. It could also be just a red and black jersey where the black is in the middle, or the black is in the bottom end and the red is on top. But there is no red to red jersey, or red pants and red jersey mixture, which to me is a little bit disappointing. I would have liked to see that. But their white to whites and black to blacks are pretty nice. Their white on black is okay. It's not the most appealing to me. And their black on whites are also okay. They're a little bit better than the white on blacks. But that's really what they're going with now. So, and they have a white on red, which honestly I should never want to see. I don't want to see that one on the field at all. And that's just how particularly I feel about it. So let's keep it going here about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Buccaneers have 3 new jerseys. They have some serifs on their jerseys, and their numbers already look way better than before. So they have some good color schemes. So they have I don't want to call it a gray. It's not really a gray. It's kind of a mix, more like a brownish, a pewter. So they have an all pewter color rush jersey, and it is nice. I like it. Pewter is a nice color for them, and it makes sense. It fits the red that they have going on the pewter pants are cool, and I am not a fan of how they spell out. So it's weird. I'm not a fan of how they spell out Buccaneers here, because sometimes it looks a bit off-centered when it looks like numbers are underneath. So like the one that's showing here has a 54 shown, and it just makes the 54 look a little bit strange to me. I would have much rather have seen something else than Buccaneers. Maybe Tampa. Maybe it's just how long the word Buccaneer is spread across the jersey. But it's a bit weird. They do have them all white, and that's nice. It's always nice to see some all-white jerseys come out. The black face masks are back on the pewter helmets to pair with more simple yet red and white sharp jerseys and pewter and white pants. So the NFL probably should ditch the one helmet rule for this, because we should be seeing some really, really cool throwback items, or throwback options to use, but it's just not the case that you're just not going to see it happen probably anytime soon. But those are the jerseys right now, and you got to believe that. I would think that most of the fan bases are probably satisfied with those jersey choices. I just think that the ATL one is really controversial to me because of just the way the numbers look, man. It's going to take a long time for me to ever really be satisfied and say, you know what, that was a quality design choice. I just don't see how you make numbers that thick there was more it takes too much surface area of the torsos. It's really throwing me off, and I'm sure it's throwing other people off as well. And I think that jerseys really make you feel good, and I hope the players feel good in it. I'm sure they will. They get paid to play in the jersey, so I don't think they care what they look like to a certain extent. I'm sure they care to some degree, but at the end of the day, if their checks are the same and they make the same amount of money, then why not? It doesn't matter. But I do think, sometimes the clothes do make you feel better. It doesn't make the man, but it definitely makes the man feel a little bit better. So why not have some really, really good duds? But I think this also is a factor that the NFL probably should be a little bit more lenient in what you can do with your jerseys. I'm not saying go full-on Oregon Ducks here and you just have a new jersey every week. But there should be more options. There should be more helmets. You should be able to mix and match. You should be able to have some more throwback options because it just makes it more fun. If you want kids to really, really embrace the NFL even more than they do now, not to say they don't endorse it or they don't like the NFL, but if you want the kids involved, you got to look at what sells for kids, man. It's customization. It's showing different things, being different. Think like how Fortnite took over. Fortnite as a game took over because it was free, but a lot of kids love it because, one, the dances, there's so many dances and there's so many different emotes and celebrations. Two, which the NFL has already looked into as they made celebrations more fun and they brought them back and there's no longer penalties involved with celebrating to a certain extent. And, of course, the skins in the game. So the skins that players can get really, 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 really make people go crazy. Some people really enjoy the skins in the game, and they'll pay X amount of money, they'll grind X amount of hours in the game just to get one skin. So imagine if the NFL started doing some really, really dope jersey concepts, and all of a sudden, your jersey sales would go up. People would be buying it. Now look at the NBA. NBA with the city jerseys or the earned jerseys, that they won a championship. I would love to see the earned concept in the NFL, to see the teams that have earned championships, what their jerseys would look like, and look like city jerseys essentially. That'd be really dope. But we're gonna go ahead and take our last break, and we're gonna get into our final topic of the day.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Okay, so I have really just three. Three what ifs, and what would the outcome have been, in my opinion, if these what ifs have happened in football during this off-season/past season. So, number one, if Cam Newton played last season, played the full season and got his yearly averages, do they still move on from Cam Newton for this season? I think the answer is yes, but I do not believe that Cam Newton would be teamless. I feel like he would have been traded and they would have been compensated for Cam Newton being off the team. But I think that this was a thing that's kind of done its part for the ownership and the GM and front office. I think they were ready to move on from that generation of Carolina, considering that Greg Olsen is gone, even though Greg Olsen did not in particularly want to leave or not play football, and he did not seem to want to leave Carolina. And then, of course, their head coach, Ron Rivera, was fired before the season really ended. So there's also that in particular that happened at the same time. So there's a lot of writing on the wall, and not to mention Luke Kuechly retired. Granted, we don't know if that has anything to do with the front office and more to do with his actual health and ability, but it just seems to be a lot of things, a lot of factors involved that look like the Panthers generation that was the Kuechly, Cam Newton, Ron Rivera generation is now out of the window, and in comes this new generation of, not Matt Rule, excuse me, but is it Matt Rule? I believe so. Matt Rule and his new regime there in Carolina. So, yeah, I think Cam Newton would probably be gone. What team would he have been on? I'm not too sure. Maybe the Chargers? Maybe New England? I don't know. Because I'm not sure in this scenario, because I have another scenario that involves New England coming up, that I feel that New England would still be looking for a quarterback regardless of the situation. So maybe Cam ends up in New England. Maybe he still could right now. It just would not be, it's not likely at the moment in time. We have to wait and see what the draft looks like for all these different teams. All right, next little scenario. If Cincinnati took Chase Young at number 1, what do the Redskins do? So there's two options here. The Redskins, of course, could take Tua. I'm sorry, not take Tua. I always say that, but they would. They could take Joe Burrow, or they could trade back somewhere else, because at this point, you would imagine that there's nobody in the top 3 that they would really want outside of Chase Young, and Chase Young is gone. So they trade back for maybe even a good ransom. That because most people who need quarterbacks would assume that Joe Burrow is off the board at 1. So let's say Joe Burrow is on the board at 2. I would have to say the phone calls would be massive. First of all, it would be the craziest draft thing in the first few rounds that maybe I've ever seen, as far as just momentous. I remember when the Saints traded into the first round, and people really legit thought this was Lamar Jackson was going to be a New Orleans Saint. And not only were people online on Twitter football Twitter was losing their minds, but I was also losing my mind because I thought it was happening. I thought, oh my gosh, we're moving on from Drew. We're about to get really, really athletic. We're about to get Lamar Jackson. It's about to go crazy. And they didn't end up getting Lamar Jackson. They ended up getting Marcus Davenport, who I'm not mad that they got. But it was also really, really anticlimactic a little bit. But it just seemed like the world was going to implode. Falcons fans were digging their graves as the draft happened because everybody thought that Lamar was going to go because the Saints pulled essentially the draft version of a fake kick or a onside kick. So, yeah, I think that is something that you have to look into in this scenario, is that people are going to lose their minds, for one. 2, it would probably be so backwards to what people thought was going to happen that they probably don't even have a scenario. I don't even think a GM would have a scenario in place for if Joe Burrow were to fall, because I just don't think Joe Burrow falls. But then again, probably do, because that's their job, is to have those type of thought process and scenarios. But what would the trades even look like? What would you trade for Joe Burrow? I'm sure you're trading the first round, but what other picks are you trading? What other players are you trading? What does this do for, the Redskins? That would just be really interesting. I wish there was a way you could live out different scenarios and see how the outcome came. If there's like a parallel universe where Joe Burrow goes not first, if Joe Burrow does not go first overall, that would be really, really intriguing to me. All right, last one. if Drew Brees retired this offseason, would Tom Brady have retired as well? And I think the answer is no, because I don't believe that Tom Brady works on other people's schedules. I think that Tom Brady is very self-oriented. He believes in himself, and if he felt like he could play, it doesn't matter what anybody else did. Even if it looks like Drew Brees and Tom Brady are tracing the same records, and they look like they're competing for the same records all the time, I highly doubt that they care about, either one of them really care about these records as much as people in the media think they do, and making this seem like a race to Peyton's record or a race to all these other records. And that's why they're staying in and playing as long as they are, because at the end of the day, they want to be the one to hold it at the end and not the other one. But I really think Tom Brady is out to prove something, because he believes that the Patriots don't, not to say they don't believe in him, but they have disrespected him to some degree, and they feel like he's been given a shorthand and not been given the respect that he feels like he rightfully deserved, being the quarterback for the best football franchise in the last 20 years. So I think he has the right to feel disrespected in that regard and chase another ring with some other team and prove that he could do it one more time. He could have the chance to do it one more time. And it seems really fun it's going to be really fun to see if he can prove himself to this degree, and it's going to be a storyline for the remainder of his playing time, because he did sign a 2-year deal, not a 1 year. So this is not a one and done. This is in fact multiple years here. But I would think that if Tom Brady were to win the Super Bowl in his first year, I would think that there's probably a tender or a contract clause where he can opt out and he would retire, because I don't think he has anything else to prove at that point. But then again, Tom Brady is the type to say if he can still play, he's just going to play, and he's going to try and win again and again and again and again. But that is it for the GSMC GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. You know, college football comes in a few days, so stay tuned for that if you like college football. We'll be doing one. I do it every Sunday. It comes out every Monday, so stay tuned for a college show. But thank you all for listening to the Fantasy Football Podcast on GSMC. And don't forget to rate and review us on whatever platform you choose to listen to us. And don't forget to follow our social media. We try to stay active on there, and we try to interact with guys all the time. So have some fun with us, interact with us, send them some stuff, ask us any question that you have about fantasy or football in general, maybe even life, some cooking stuff, something to take your mind off this whole quarantine business. But don't forget, guys, please stay safe. Make sure you're practicing social distancing, and only go out if you're going for essentials. But with that said, this has been the podcast. Thank you all for listening. See you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.